This is gonna hurt my frugal friends out there. So there's that common saying, do as I say, not as I do. My pocket money, I'm kind of doing the opposite of Alora. Hello, welcome back to another personal finance podcast episode with me, Kyle. Today we're going to be talking about consumers and kind of the psychology of money a little bit. And then we're going to talk about teaching money, specifically how my wife and I plan to teach financial habits to our kids. And then the last thing we're going to talk about today is my spending habits, specifically how my wife and I spend our pocket money each and every month. So let's go ahead and start out with the first topic, which is going to be about the psychology of money. So I was reading an article talking about how psychology, our way of thinking, and money, how they interact. And if you're somebody who follows along with Dave Ramsey's financial tips and things like that, then you may have heard of him saying before that life is not a math problem, and that for most people, they know what good spending habits look like. They know mathematically what the right thing to do is, but behaviorally, they're making choices that are hurting their personal finances. So I was reading a little bit about this article, and it was talking about the fact that we as people have kind of two things going on in our brains. We have one that is kind of our impulsive, automatic thinking that we have, and then the other is our more reflective thinking that allows us to make more advanced and deeper thoughts about specific topics. And so they were talking about how people have what they call heuristics, or rules of thumb, that they guide their thinking by, and that is what allows them to make automatic thoughts very quickly. So we're going to kind of go over some of those rules of thumb that are faulty thinking that causes us to make bad decisions financially. So the first one that they mentioned is called availability bias. So essentially these are situations where you think about specific instances in history, whether it be the history of the country or your own personal history, and then this current problem you're in, you assume it's going to be similar to that problem. And they gave the example of the stock market. So when the stock market crashes, people start pulling their money out and all this stuff because they think about the Great Recession, they think about the Great Depression, they think about those horrible times in the stock market and them losing money, so they pull their money out due to those instances without thinking beyond the current stock market crash, knowing that it's going to rebound and there are going to be opportunities to gain back your money. So you could think about your own personal life and how when you run into certain situations, sometimes you think about personal events that happened in your life, and you attach what happened then to what's going on right now and assume that the current problem is going to end up exactly like those previous problems. People with, I guess you could say, trauma or rough histories can fall into this trap of thinking that the current situation is going to play out exactly the same as the previous ones. And then that causes us to make irrational decisions, which then can put us in a hole and hurt our finances. The next one that they talk about is representativeness bias. And they gave the example of the Great Recession when lots of banks started going under, and that hurt people's finances, especially with the mortgages and the mortgage crisis that happened during that time. And that seeing all this in the news caused people not only to see bankers in these big national and international companies as greedy and corrupt, but they started associating that with community bankers too. So these small-time banks that may only exist in your small town or may only exist in one state, they started associating the behavior of these big corporation bankers with these small-time bankers and putting them in the same group. And this can be bad when we do that because we may miss opportunities for financial success for ourselves because of that association. So for me personally, I fall into this trap when it comes to the automotive industry. So I think of pretty much anybody in the automotive industry when it comes to dealerships, mechanics, oil change places, tire replacement places. All of them get lumped up into the same thing for me, which is they're shysters. They're constantly trying to upsell you. They're not really in the business for your good or anything like that. So for me, that's something I have to constantly overcome when it comes to working with people like that. That no, not every person out there is trying to swindle you. And that just shows that when you do find somebody like that, especially in the automotive industry, that is honest and handles things with integrity, that you should hang on to that person and you should continue to keep that relationship because they are one of the good ones. So, but that just shows, though, if you always think about things as everybody's bad, you're going to miss those opportunities where there is a good one, and you miss that relationship because you assume that they're bad too, and now you're continuing to find other bad auto dealer people out there that are just trying to pull one over on you. So that's something that I've had to overcome personally, and I have found mechanics that I trust, that I feel they are doing the right thing, they have integrity, and they are the first ones that I will call if I need my car fixed or whatever big repair that needs to be done. So if you find yourself in the same boat as me, that's something that has to be overcome, because as a rule of thumb, if you're always thinking automatically about that person because of their profession, they must be a shyster. Well, that may not always be the case. The next one that they talked about is anchoring bias. And this one's a big one, especially with certain companies. Anchoring bias is when you come in and the first price tag you see, that is the price that holds value to you. So I think of like Hobby Lobby, for example. So Hobby Lobby, they are always running sales, constantly running sales. And so when you go into their store and you see that price tag, that original price sticker, that's the anchoring bias that's happening. You see it, and then you look at the sale, and it's so much cheaper than that other price, you feel like you're getting a good deal. And that's because that price is deviating from the original one, the one that you're anchored to, and it's much lower, so you're thinking, wow, I'm really getting something here. Of course, it's a sales tactic. If Hobby Lobby was losing money on these sales, they would not be doing it, right? Because practically everything's on sale all the time in Hobby Lobby. That shows they're making money, and you know what? That original price may be an overinflated price for what it really is worth. And you see this all the time with people on Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that. They will price their item, their product, high in anticipation that you might try to whittle them down, but you're only whittling them down to the price that they actually wanted to sell the product for. And so you got to be careful of that. Just because you see that original price tag doesn't really mean that's truly what it is priced at. They're doing that on purpose to try to anchor you to that price and associate the product to that price, so that you feel like you're getting a good deal and will be willing to pay the money for it. I think, what is it? I think Dave Ramsey has said before that you're not really saving money when you go and buy something on sale. You're still spending money to get that thing. It's not truly a save. If you're wanting to save money, then you need to stop spending money, and that's how you actually save. By buying something on a deal, you're not really saving. I know there's other videos out there that talk about girl math and things like that, and it's kind of all lumped into the same idea, that the sale is not truly what you think it is. It is using this anchoring bias strategy to get people to think that they're getting a good deal. The next one is called loss aversion, and this is going to hurt my frugal friends out there. So people who are really frugal, they may be having this loss aversion bias in the sense that when they buy something, the pain of losing the money is greater than the joy that they get from whatever product they just bought. And this can be a bad mindset to put yourself in, because then you're robbing yourself of the joy of what money is supposed to be, which is a tool to get you things that you want. And we've talked about before the good things to spend money on, and it primarily is around spending time with people that you enjoy spending time with. So your family and friends. So when you're spending money around that, that's how you get true joy. But if you're frugal and you're thinking about it from a loss aversion standpoint, then you're thinking more about the fact that you lost money to get that thing than you are thinking about what you got in the first place. So if you're a frugal person and you're thinking about everything in terms of loss, you need to challenge that mindset a little bit, because you may miss opportunities that may actually benefit you in the long run. There are things in life that we spend money on, and then they end up being of value later on, and we have to get past the sticker price, the initial price, before we can see the benefits of that long run thing. So like, for example, it is cheaper to buy coffee every day at the store, whatever restaurant you're going to, than it is to buy the upfront cost of some sort of coffee machine and all the things that are needed to go with that. But if you can look beyond that, you can see that in the long run, it's cheaper to make coffee at home and drink that than it is to keep going out every single day to buy a coffee. So if you're a person with loss aversion, you're not going to see that, right? You're not going to see what you gained. You're only focused on what you lost. And then you lose those opportunities to put yourself in a better financial position. The last one that I'm going to talk about that they mentioned in the article is mental accounting, which is the exact opposite of loss aversion. So these are the people that when they look at different piles of money, they don't put the same value on them. Yes, all of it's money, and yes, it's all actually worth the same amount, but they associate, well, this pile over here is actually more valuable than this pile over here. The best example of this is a person with a gambling problem. They will say, well, I'm just using house money right now. So essentially that money that they have, they don't value it at the same amount as the money that they walked into the gambling place with. That money is worth more to them than the money that they have won in the gambling place, because that's house money. It's worth all the same, but to them, it's money that they feel that they can just burn. So when you have this kind of mentality that this money I could just burn and then this money is more important, you overextend yourself. These are people that fly too close to the sun. They're willing to take too many risks. And then because they take too many risks, they take a lot of unnecessary losses. And going back to the gambling situation, of course, the house is more than happy for you to continue to use house money in your gambling addiction, because they know in the long run, you're going to lose that money back to them. So you're winning right now, but because you're not going to cut out right now and quit while you're ahead, you're going to keep flying too close to the sun because you're using house money. They're going to get all that money back, and they may even get the money that you walked into the property with, because then you're going to say, oh, well, I had all this money. I got to just earn it back. I got to gain it back. And then you start taking a bunch of L's, and now you walk out with nothing. So people with this mental accounting problem, where they're associating their money differently depending on where it's coming from or depending on what it's meant to be spent on, they are taking too many unnecessary risks that are going to eventually put them in a situation of bankruptcy or needing to take on extra debts to cover the losses that they did not see coming because they were not associating money as it's all money, it's all worth the same. So the reason why I've gone through all of these is because when we have a better understanding of these different biases that are going on in our minds, we can catch ourselves in the act of going through and using them, like the anchoring bias, for example. We can catch ourselves and say, wait a minute, is this really a sale? Or is it just they have such a high markup that it feels like a sale when it's really just regularly priced? And we can catch ourselves and stop ourselves from making silly financial mistakes. And also, going back to the beginning, we have two parts of our thinking going on. If we can catch ourselves and know that we usually go by our biases, our rule of thumbs, our automatic thinking, then we can say, wait a minute, I need to stop and think first. I need to stop and use that more rational part of my thinking before I make this purchase. You know, it was funny when I was reading that article, it talked about how economists used to think that the consumer, the regular customer, was a rational thinking person who was going to do what was best for them. And then as they studied financial habits of people, they discovered the exact opposite was true. People are irrational spenders. They do what ends up usually harming them in the long run. And it's because they're not using that rational thinking part of their brain, which requires time. It requires settling in and waiting instead of being impulsive. So if you find yourself being impulsive, I have some shorts, and I think I have another video talking about overspending tips. And I talk about that. I talk about ways to slow ourselves down so that we use the rational part of our thinking rather than the irrational part. So maybe after this video, go check out those overspending tip videos that I have where you can set yourself up for success so you're not finding yourself constantly impulsively buying things. All right, let's go to the next segment here, and that is teaching our kids how to be wise stewards of their money. So this actually comes from a commenter that asked what my wife and I plan on doing with our own kids when it comes to teaching them how to use money effectively. And so one of the things that became kind of the forefront of my mind when I was thinking about this question is that I want one guiding principle for both of us when it comes to teaching our kids with money. And that guiding principle is to live by example. Our kids, all kids, I should say, live by what they see. They're going to see your example and what you do first before they ever really hear what you're saying. So there's that common saying, do as I say, not as I do. Well, unfortunately, if you're trying to teach your children good habits, you need to do the exact opposite. You need to start living out the attributes you want your kids to adopt. And if you don't start doing it yourself, it's not going to happen with them. They need to see it first. It needs to become part of what is considered normal to them. Right? Every family has a family culture, and that is what is considered normal to your kids until they start interacting with other people and learning about other ways of doing things. So you need to build a culture that shows that money is thought about in this way. We use money for these ways, and this is how we handle it. And that will then become what is considered normal to them. So that's the first and foremost thing, is that we want to live by example, by doing the right things with money, voicing out loud what we're thinking. I do this as a teacher all the time. I don't leave my thoughts in my head. I'm constantly talking out loud to my kids in the classroom because I want them to understand that these are the thoughts that are going through my head to tackle the problem that we're currently dealing with. Often I do this with math. I will say, all right, I'm thinking about this. I need to do 5 times 4, which I know equals 20. And, as I'm thinking all this out loud, I'm not just writing it on the board and hoping that they're getting it. And so it's the same thing with our kids. When we're buying things, when we're budgeting, we're going to think out loud. We're going to tell them why we're doing what we're doing, and then they can pick up on it. So when it comes to them right now, right, they're just little kids right now. They're not going to grasp a monthly budget or anything like that. But as they grow, we want our instruction to grow with them. And so some of the early things that we're going to do is just associate work with money. So eventually when Caspian's old enough to start handling some chores, there's going to be money associated with that. You do work and you get something for it, because we want to build that work ethic. And then eventually when they get old enough to get an actual job where they'll get an actual paycheck, they will have already had that built in, that yes, I have to put in work if I want to get a paycheck. That's how life works. The other thing we want to do is when they earn that money, we want to show them that things cost money. So when they're getting those little bits of allowance from doing their chores, they'll have an opportunity to go and spend it on something. And then they'll see the transaction happen. They'll feel the transaction too, because they'll know, I worked to get this money, and now I'm seeing the money leave, and I'm getting this item for it. So things cost money, and I need to be careful with what I'm spending it on, because I only have a certain amount of money unless I want to go back to work and get more. So all of that we're hoping to kind of be able to teach when they're really young through practice, by having them just do it. And then it'll implicitly be internalized that yes, work is how you get money, and in order to get stuff, you must give up your money to get it. So that's their younger years. They're not quite there yet. They're still very young. Caspian's 3, he's getting close to 4, and then Ellery is 1, but she's getting closer to 2. They are not at the age yet to quite associate that. But I'm hoping that in the next couple years or so, Caspian can then be brought into that. He already likes doing chores right now. They'll just be adding money to the chores. And then Ellery, of course, we'll try to get her on board when she gets a little older too. But looking beyond where they're at right now, when they become teenagers and they get older, we're going to want them to get a first job. We're going to be talking about buying a car. We're going to talk about the costs that are associated with that. When my wife and I start budgeting monthly, we're going to probably want to, well, actually, we're already budgeting monthly, but when we do it during that time, we're going to want to bring our kids into it. We're going to want them to see the real numbers. We're going to want them to be able to know that, oh yeah, there's an electricity bill. And for my parents, it's been costing them this much. And this is how much they are netting at the end of the month. And all these different things that are going with it. So to kind of build that into them. Because when I was a kid, I didn't really see any of that. Yes, I did chores. I earned money. I saved up money for things that I wanted. I did all of that stuff. But as far as my own parents' finances, the most I would hear is, oh, well, money's kind of tight this month, so we kind of need to dial it back a little bit. And in my young mind, I don't know what that means. I don't know any context about that. Are we a month away from getting booted out of our house? Like, what are we talking about here? I had no context to go with that. So I kind of want to not do that with our kids. I want them to be able to be aware of what we're spending things on so that they're more prepared when they need to go out and do the same for themselves. And then I even think about when my wife and I, when we first got married, I kind of took that stuff with me into marriage. I would tell Alora, well, we kind of need to dial it back a little bit with our spending this month. And for her, it was the same kind of thinking that I had when I was a kid. Oh, I guess we have only $3 in the bank account. We need to buckle down and all this stuff. And really all I was saying is we need to try to, pull back on $50, $100 this month. You cut out a couple things and we should be good. And that's really all I was saying, but because of the way I was conveying it, it sounded like we have barely any money in the bank account and we need to go DEFCON 1 right now, buckle down. So I don't want that. I don't want to carry that into teaching my kids how to handle money. I want to be more open and more honest with them about it, because I feel and this is just family dynamics in general. When you're teaching your kids about anything that becomes hush hush, anything that becomes something you can't talk about, then they either have no knowledge in that area, that topic, or they're finding their information from a different source. You're their parent. You know them best, and you should be the first voice on that topic, whatever topic it is. In this case, we're talking about money, but it's beyond that. It's other things too. You should be the first voice that they hear about that topic. But if you make it this taboo thing, well, then they're going to go somewhere else. And that somewhere else may not be a good source. So if you have kids, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect in this at all. I'm just going based off of my own personal experience here. But if you have kids, you should be that source. And you should say, there's nothing off the table. Anything you want to bring to me, I will talk about it with you. And we will work through it together. I'm going to be an open book for you so that you have a source to come to and get some information. You may not be I'm not the most knowledgeable source in anything, but there's an answer to that too. If you don't really know the question that your kid is asking you, it's okay, I'm going to do a little bit of research, you do a little bit of research, and let's talk about this again in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And then we can have another discussion about it. That way, you have an opportunity to educate yourself on the topic a little bit and sort of control where the source is going to be, where the source of information is going to come from. If you're a Christian, the source should probably first start with the Bible, right? That should be the first start. And then after that, maybe some Christian people that you look up to that may have more knowledge about the topic than you do and can point you in the right direction for certain things. And then after that, maybe you can start to look at other sources if those first two don't have anything to say about that particular topic. So yeah, that's, as you can see, the overall idea when it comes to teaching our kids about money is going to be less about textbooks. Yes, I'm a teacher and we do textbooks all the time, but it's going to be less about that. It's going to be more about practice, putting it into practice. Because you can have it all up here. You can have all the head knowledge. You can know that mathematically this is the right choice. But a lot of things when it comes to money is behavior. And you have to teach behavior through practice, not through theory, but through doing. That's how you get better. You have to build a habit, right? It takes 30 days to build a habit, repeatedly doing it over and over again. And a lot of times when you're doing that, you're breaking an old habit in order to create the new one. So you're fighting an old habit while creating a new one at the same time. And it all has to do with practice. All right, let's go ahead and go to the last segment then, which is my spending habits. So we have talked about in our monthly budget videos that we have a line item called pocket money. And we both get the same line item. And right now it's $30. And eventually it'll probably go up as we create more margin in our budget and all of that. And we decide to loosen up a little bit more. But right now it's $30. And my wife, she usually spends her pocket money on a lot of little things. So a lot of little things, a lot of thrifting, a lot of that. So it's a bunch of little things that add up to that $30. For myself, I don't really do it that way. I don't buy a bunch of little things. I will buy one big thing. So it'll be one big thing, usually adds all the way up to $30 or close to $30. And that's my one thing for the month. A lot of times, those kinds of things are going to be hobbies of mine, which is Steam games, which are video games to use on my computer, or they are board games that I can play with family and friends. And so a lot of times those kinds of things, those video games and board games, are less than $30. If they happen to be more than $30, then the next thing I do is I will save my pocket money from 1 month to then spend in the next month. So if I abstain from spending 1 month, then I get $60 the next month to spend because I didn't spend it in the previous month. And so I'll do things like that to buy bigger things, like, for example, more expensive board games, because there are board games out there that cost $40, $50, $60. There are video games that cost that amount too, but usually I'm not buying expensive video games. And then some other things that I have bought besides that is I recently bought an overcoat for this winter. I wanted something a little bit more fancier than my current winter coat that I have, and it could be something I could wear on Sundays, and when I have like a vest or dress shirt and tie and all that kind of stuff. I've been kind of reflecting more on my life, I guess, and trying to better myself a little bit. I've been exercising more, trying to get some nicer clothing and things like that, and get rid of clothing that I've had since high school, which was a long time ago at this point, and just trying to better myself. So I bought the overcoat. That took a few months of saving to do, because that was not a $30 or even a $60 thing. That was more like an $80 to $90 thing. So it took a little bit of saving to get to that. Another thing that I saved quite a bit for is upgrades to my personal computer. And I had to actually create a sinking fund for that too. So I took my pocket money plus the sinking fund and put the things together to make it happen. So that was another big purchase that happened. And I think that took about $200 or a little bit more than that, I think, to do all the upgrades necessary to get my computer where I wanted it to be. And so as you can see, when it comes to my pocket money, I'm kind of doing the opposite of Alora. She's spending it every month, and it's a lot of little things. I'm spending it on big things, and it's usually one thing a month, or it's waiting a couple months, or in some cases 3 months, in order to buy something big and get that. So some future things I'll probably buy with my pocket money. I'm not going to be able to buy anything this month because I've already spent the pocket money, but next month I'll finally have pocket money again to be able to buy things and stuff. And I don't know, I'll probably be looking more into things that could be betterment, less entertainment things, more things that will better me. So maybe clothing and maybe some more exercise stuff or things like that in the future. So we'll see. I'll try to include you guys in on about that too, what other things I'm buying in the future. I know there was a comment mentioned in one of the, I think, monthly budgeting videos talking about talking about the things that we buy with our pocket money, specifically me, because I usually don't share a lot of that. Laura will share sometimes in the videos. So go ahead and watch those too. I'll try to include more of that information when I am buying things as well, so that you can kind of see what it looks like in our life, and that we're not just preaching to you, but we're also practicing what we're preaching as well. If you have any thoughts about the video that we just discussed, all these different topics and stuff, go ahead and leave those comments down below. As always, try to like the video for me, because that helps get that video out a little bit better. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. As always, thank you for watching.